Life and Times of Godfather. Tonight, we're going to talk about Curtis Mayfield. Meeting, getting to work with Curtis was one of the high points of my career. I met Curtis in 1982 at Access Studios. He was working on his last release for Boardwalk Records, the album Honesty. It came out in 1983. Curtis took a liking to me. I just started engineering and really didn't know what I was doing, but I was a producer before I was an engineer. And he took a liking to me and invited me. He had just built a studio at his home on Austin Road in Atlanta, Georgia. And he invited me to come work with him. Of course, I took him up on the offer. So I started, going over to his studio, helping him put it together and learning the ins and outs of the equipment that he had. It was older equipment. I was working at Access and we had the modern new stuff, the Neve board, studio recorders. He had like an MCI 300 series board. I think it was an Ampeg 16 track. And I can't remember what the 24 track was he had back then. Eventually, we switched to a Soundcraft board and a Soundcraft recorder. It was a great experience, working with Curtis in those early times. I transferred all his old masters to F1 Digital. He's one of the few individual artists that actually owned everything that he had recorded. Superfly was released on his label, his publishing company, and he was the artist, which was highly unusual. He had a distribution deal through Buddha Records through Atlanta and made an astronomical amount of money because of this. He wore all the hats on that record, and it was a huge success.
His mind was a song, but the man lived alone. Oh, Superfly. You're gonna make you want your mind back. But if you lose, don't ask no questions why. Don't the game, you know it's do or die. The game he plays,
I learned so much from working with Curtis. He allowed me to work hand in hand with him, releasing his old music and developing and working on new projects. It's things that I learned by having access to his contracts and to, his legacy that opened up many doors for me. And my knowledge of intellectual property is through the roof because of that. Curtis recorded and released over 500 songs that were on the top 40. A lot of them were top 10, top 20 records for many artists through the years. He told me a story once. Even before I tell you about that, Curtis wrote his first hit, Gypsy Woman, when he was 13 years old.
from nowhere through a caravan around campfire light. a lovely woman in motion, with hair as dark as night. Her eyes were like that of a cat in the dark that hypnotized me with love. She was a gypsy woman. She was a gypsy woman.
He started Curtis Publishing of Mayfield Music when he was 17. He started Curtis Records when he was 19. People don't realize how young he was doing the things that he was doing. He told me one time that the reason he started a publishing company, he said, well, I feel like the white folks had it, I would guess I should have it too. And that's really was his rationale behind owning his own publishing, which developed into a lot of revenue through the years for him. I personally got a chance, to talk to him about many things, about life, about the industry, and just, various things. He told me one time, he said, Carlos, he said, if you ever make a lot of money, buy all the things you want. If you want a nice car, buy you a nice car. If you want a nice house, buy you a nice house. But just because you keep making money don't mean you have to keep spending money. The rest is gravy. He was the most frugal man I probably ever met. And that's why when he died, he had an immense fortune, really, compared to a lot of black musicians, and artists from his era. Because, he kept, most of the money that he made. He didn't have many bad habits. He shopped a little bit, he did his thing eventually, but when he started out in the 60s, Curtis didn't drink. In fact, he told me a story once. He used to, when the Prussians used to travel, he would be the one that when they went out and partied after the shows, he would be the one that stayed at the hotel to watch the instruments and watch everybody's wallet and wrote songs. That's how he wound up writing so many songs. He didn't drink, he didn't smoke. He told me a story once about being at a radio station doing an interview. Our personality told him, well, I guess once you leave here, you're going to go have you a nice bottle of cold duck. Curtis said he told him, well, no, I really prefer hot chicken. He didn't even know what cold duck was. And cold duck was, for you youngsters, was a type of liquor, in the 70s and 60s. But, he was very, very inspirational to me, recording him, understanding his psyche and his view on the world. He was like the movement writer. His songs were the backdrop for the civil rights movement in the 60s. His songs like Move On Up, We're a Winner, Amen. I can remember my parents, as I said in the last episode, I really wasn't into black music, but they would listen to Curtis Mayfield. And a lot of his stuff had a deep religious undertone. Curtis was raised in the church by his grandmama. She had a storefront church in Chicago, and that's where he got a lot of his musical training. He was a guitar player. I was a guitar player. I am a guitar player, I should say. So, just getting a chance to work with him, see how he played, and he tuned his his guitar like the black keys of a piano. You know, he had a very unusual tuning. So therefore, a lot of his chords and the colorings that he did were different. And I loved it. You know, he had a very beautiful guitar style. Probably the first record we did at his studio, they went to Montrose, I guess maybe it had to be 86, 87 maybe. And they recorded, you know, they gave Curtis the recording that they made at Montrose. And he brought it back and we edited it into a record called Live in Europe. It came out in 1988. It was an interesting record. They had a video. I wish I could find the video portion for that recording too. You know, that would be nice to see.
People get ready. There's a train a-coming. You don't need no baggage. You just get on board. All you need is faith to hear the diesels humming. You don't need no ticket. You just thank the Lord.
That was probably the first record that I did with him at his studio on his label. He started in Curtom here in Atlanta, and he opted to let John Abbey with Ichiban Records distribute his label. I was really sort of upset with Curtis at the time because I knew we could have gotten a distribution deal with Warner Brothers, any of the major labels that we wanted. But Curtis opted to go with John, and basically he said, well, the warehouse is here. I can go over there and look at my product, you know, and check on it. And he felt much more comfortable doing that than going with a larger label. So it could have been more lucrative or greater advances. But Curtis was a very astute businessman when it came to the industry, and he understood ownership. He had reversion clauses in his Buddha contract, you know, with Atlantic, where at a certain point, all his masters reverted back to him. That's why he was able to own all his catalog. His partner, Marv Stewart, owned a certain percentage. And I think maybe around 88, 89, Marv came to Curtis and was telling Curtis he had an offer for people to buy. Somebody made an offer to buy the catalog and the masters for like $100,000. And knowing Marv, it probably was him or one of his buddies trying to trick Curtis out of it, you know. So Curtis told him, you know, I think he may have owned 40%. He said, well, why don't I just give you that little $40,000 myself if that's all you want? And that's what Curtis did. And at that point, he wholly owned all his masters himself. That's when we started releasing a few more things. He did the Take It to the Street album in 1990. The first single was Do Be Down.
Everybody say to you all the time, you be true. Everybody want, but no one can find. To be loved, a human need that is never failed. Well, baby, I don't care, just to be there.
It was an interesting record. Curtis loved the idea. He bought all the instruments, all the new stuff, everything was there at the studio available. So it helped me to develop as a musician, as a producer, because Curtis bought everything. I had everything, all the new stuff right there at my fingertips. All I had to do was learn how to use it. So I had a lot of growth personally during these years too, as a producer and as a musician. Curtis eventually, was in an accident. He was in New York. They were doing an outside show. Forget the exact location. But from the way they describe it, a big gust of wind came up and they were trying to get off stage. And the big gust of wind blew the lighting truss down and one fell and broke Curtis' neck. At that point, he was paralyzed from the neck down. And was so for about the next 10 years. I forget the exact year the accident happened. But Curtis survived and was paralyzed, was a quadriplegic for about 10 years before he died. But he didn't give up. We worked on projects, the New World Order album. He did an album before that, a tribute album. He had several songs with Michael Walden. He did stuff with Roger, with Zapp. Roger, seeing him with Curtis and him Roger was a very funny man. I can still see him imitating Donald Duck and just clowning. It was a tragedy, how Roger died. That was, he was a very, very enjoyable human being. But Curtis didn't give up. We worked on a soundtrack album with, I shouldn't say an album, a song for the movie, Eve's Bayou, with Erykah Badu, when she was a very young star. I think she probably had one album out. He really didn't know who she was, and she was a very frustrating experience for her because Curtis was so huge that people would come around, people would come from Europe, to see Curtis. Curtis may not even come out the house. Like Erykah, he's like, well, who is she? He didn't care. Danced to his own drummer, had his own clock. He did basically what he wanted to do because he was independent and wealthy. He was a very, very frugal man, though. He used to, if Curtis wanted to treat you out, he'd say, let's run by Piccadilly and grab something to eat. Or if there was a lot of folks and the musicians and stuff like that, he'd say, well, let's go see the Colonel. Let's go get a bucket of chicken. He was, he was amazing with that. His kids used to kill me. He used to make them shop at Kmart and wear Jeepers and stuff like that. They didn't get any Jordans or anything like that till they were much older. They would be embarrassed because they lived in Huntcliffe in a very exclusive neighborhood. But Curtis wouldn't spend any money buying clothes like that. Not till years later. It was working on the New World Order album with Curtis was a great experience. I recorded most of the album with Curtis on the stretcher, in the slab, because he couldn't sit up. He had, worked hard and was able to sing, from that position. So we were able to do the record. Myself, Ramondo Thomas, Sugar Ray, Brian Fleming, Kool-Aid, and Rosemary Wood worked as a team with Curtis, and we did 4 songs, produced and wrote 4 songs on that album, along with Curtis. The album had critical acclaim. It didn't really reach the sales. I still don't know if it's gold yet, but it was a great album, a great album. The song New World Order was very inspirational and very timely, for a lot of people. It was like right at, 2K, right at the year 2000 when we did it. So a lot of people were really inspired by that record. Curtis survived a very long time, longer than most paraplegics did, but his will to live and his family surrounded him. And Thea, his wife, surprisingly stuck with him and took care of him herself. They had very little help. But, Curtis eventually died. It was sad. I still miss Curtis. But his legacy, his music lives on. And again, in my life, he was a very, very important person in my growth, in my development as a music professional, as a human being. He told me something that I still live by. I was really angry with him at one point. And he stopped answering the phone for like 2 weeks. When he finally answered the phone, I was ready to curse him out. But he told me, he said, be careful what you say. Don't burn your bridges, because you never know when you have to come back. And I live by that. Sometimes you have to, just suck it up and be the bigger person and look at the greater vision of the situation that you're in. That's one thing I did learn from Curtis.